Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me for another episode of my show. And today I'm so excited to be speaking to Colleen Jack. And today Colleen is going to share with us some really valuable information for any clothing manufacturer. So if you are manufacturing clothing, designing clothing, then please, please, please sit back and watch this episode. It's jam-packed with value for all of you. I'm going to hand over to Colleen.
Perfect. So thanks, Mel. So Mel, costing comes up in so many of our conversations. And the biggest thing that I see is that the entrepreneurs themselves are not valuing themselves in the business. Whatever reason and it's often women, will minimize what we are offering, not see the value in it, compare it to store-bought stuff. And yeah, I think it's just we lack the confidence around what I've produced is worthwhile and people will pay for it. And the person who will pay for it will understand the origin of why I am charging what I'm charging for. And so we've put this series together, you and I. We're going to go through 5 series every week. And the last session will be Q&A. But I've broken it down. Most of it does relate to costing and how to break even. But what we will do today is establish how to cost on a standard minute. And I mentioned this in the first interview. We do not cost per hour. We break down our costs in a factory to a standard minute. And as always, I will take every entrepreneur seriously around treat yourself, even if you're still working in your back room, on the dining room table, wherever you're working to provide this income for your family, is I will treat you as if you are a cut, make and trim factory. So that the systems that we put into place now for the business will scale with the business. All of the formality of the business structure and systems will be put into place even as a home sewer.
I'm actually horrified at how many people I speak to who are doing sewing, and when I ask questions about costing and pricing, they only consider the raw materials that they're using. They don't factor in their time at all.
Totally. So I'm going to take us through some traditional costing models, and then I will give us a simple costing model at the end of the exercise. And as always, these notes are free and available. I'm happy to share the PDFs with people as always. But today in the PowerPoint, I've simplified those notes as much as possible. So here we'll do how to cost a garment accurately and how to tell when a style is breaking even and when it makes a profit. But what we'll first whittle out is just how to cost for you to get up and go into your workspace and spend the day working, how much that actually costs. Okay. So let's do the breakdown, as you said. So before analyzing the mechanics of the costing, we must identify the material costs. So those are the raw materials that it takes in order for you to produce a finished product. Then we've got our labor costs. And so those are your employees, or if you're sitting on the machine yourself, how do you factor in your labor cost? And then we've got, of course, your expenses. And so, as always, in order to take us seriously as entrepreneurs, whether you are renting or own your own home, I would want you to work out the square area that you work on in your home. So even if it's on the dining room table, those 2 square meters, I would like to amortize the expenses of that when you start owning and taking financial accountability for the fact that even if you're sitting at your dining room table, you're using lights, you're using water, you contribute to the cost of your rent or your bond by paying for those 2 square meters or 4 square meters or however many rooms you take up in your house in order to run your operation. Is that clear, Mel?
Yes, it is. Now, I'd just like to ask a question here, because
Yeah.
a lot of the people that I speak to say, well, when I start to add in all of these things, then my customers are no longer prepared to pay the price. What is your answer to those people?
That, as always, it is an education process, and you may have to tier your prices. And I will go into how to decide whether or not to tier your prices. Or you've got to slowly increment your costs over a couple of seasons so that the client feels less resistance to a massive jump. And I think often also with women, when we start to realize our financial worth, that we feel embarrassed to charge because we don't have the self-confidence. And that's why I say maybe take your prices up over a few seasons so that you emotionally can get used to, I am worthwhile. And the customers who have paid too little, who will be resistant to paying its worth, then they must shuffle and don't have a scarcity mindset. They were not in it for the long haul. Your customers who are loyal to your brand and understand your quality and are prepared to pay for the originality, even if it's a small run, they are practically original garments, and they will stay with you. Okay, so let's move into, there are direct costs to your business and indirect costs. And your direct costs are associated with any activity required in order to produce that garment. Your indirect costs are your overheads. And I am suggesting here that we start to take in indirect costs so that we are properly financially responsible for all of the costs that have incurred in order to sell that garment. Any questions? Makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And indirect costs are very often something that, again, in these conversations, I see people leave out. A lot of women say to me, well, I'm actually retired, I'm living off a pension, I don't need this money, so I don't need to factor these things in.
Yeah, and if you are sitting in that environment with that sort of privilege, that's wonderful. And then I would suggest that you donate some of your sewing to volunteer organizations. You know, if you've got that kind of flexibility, that's wonderful. But I'm proposing that we're not running a charity and that we're actually here to make business. And we're here to understand whether or not we can afford to run this business. And so if the garments come out too expensive, then you have to look at it and go, I cannot produce this. I am not going to ever compete with massive fashion houses who can produce a pair of leggings at 29 Rand when I have to pay 36 Rand per meter for the fabric. And so, yeah, don't compete with reinventing the wheel. Okay,
That's very useful advice.
So the job costing relates to the individual units that are run throughout that production run. While process costing is best suited for manufacturing, where we are costing each process that that garment has to go through. And this is important when I talked about tiering your pricing, is if you're going to do job costing, that is couturier work, that is one-off. That will have the highest price to it and maybe not the highest profit to it. But if that's where you want to have your creative expression and do one-offs, know that they are expensive and you never really recoup your cost or your time on those garments. And so what we're going to focus on today is taking the business seriously and looking at it as a manufacturing process. And so I recommend process costing, where we break down every step of that iterations of a garment in order to get it to a production saleable garment.
Okay.
So this is, again, for me, is look at when you break even. And your break even points are concerned with the volumes. How many units would you need to do in order to break even? And if you sell more, great, you get more profit. If you sell less, then you don't break even. But there are limitations to this exercise. And the most important thing for me is, in my years of looking at cutting orders and looking at the cost in order to do the research and development, develop the pattern, cut a few samples off that to check that the fittings are correct, go back into grading. Those resource and development costs you have to amortize them over the production run. And my experience is it takes about 100 garments to just start breaking even before you make profit.
Wow.
But you'll also find that most CMTs will not take a run in of less than 25 units.
Okay.
And so anything from 25 units to 100 units, you're still sitting in this difficult space of not quite breaking even. But at least your cut, make, and trim factory will cover their costs with a minimum run of 25 units.
Okay.
And when we go into the cutting orders, I will show you how to break that down into a cutting order and what that looks like practically. Okay, so with our cost structure, we can do marginal costing, which gives you the absolute minimum price in order to sell this garment and recoup your costs. And then we can do absorption costing, and I prefer absorption costing, where all of the variables are allocated into that cost. So what you're saying is a lot of women do marginal costing, and they don't take in to account the rent, the light and water, the electricity. I have to say I would prefer that we start doing absorption costing.
And I normally say to those people, you know, if it's not factored into your sum, then where's it coming from? And then when I start asking them to dig deeper, you know, where's it coming from? Who pays for this? Your partner, your spouse, your savings, your holiday, your medical funds. Where is this coming from? Then sometimes it can shift the mindset a little.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thanks, Mel. Okay, so what is the cost of costing? Don't chase your tail. Don't get into analysis paralysis. This is just a practical exercise of, hello, how am I doing? And am I doing this in a way that's sustainable? And, you know, if we're talking about legacy, would anyone else be able to take over the business and actually run a successful business if I choose to retire or, I don't know, go to the beach and sip pina coladas? And as always, you're right, there is a trade-off with what the market will bear and what the total cost of getting those units put up. And so I watched an interview of yours the other day with a lady from New Zealand doing toiletry bags. And it's about not personalizing customers' ignorance. And so the person was saying, oh, I could get it much cheaper at Target. Well, then don't go to an organic market or a farmer's market or a flea market expecting us to be cheaper than a Chinese import. That's not the purpose of our craft. Our craft is about people understanding and willing to pay for the aesthetic of something being original. And so there is a trade-off with what the market will bear. And again, you know, I said to you that in the first time, I spent a lot of time in business coaching sessions drowning puppies and kittens. And so often what happens is designers design things that they like, not understanding that their customers are not them. And so, you know, when we start to come to, I had somebody come to me saying that she wanted to do a jumpsuit range in pure silk. And she was a tall, leggy woman who was not from South Africa, so I did not understand the South African body shape. And so if you're tall, leggy Argentinian, you have no clue that the average size of woman in South Africa is a size 44, and she's 5'4".
Yes.
And she does not have a long back. She has a very short back and often very pear-shaped. And so is there a market for jumpsuits in silk? Maybe. But is that market in South Africa?
Unlikely.
Because by the time you have costed in that silk, you have blown yourself out of the threshold of what people are prepared to pay for. Okay, so let's do a very simple costing formula, and we'll work on any machinist is only effective for about 75% of a day. We don't run sweatshops. So of the productivity, some of that is for the sewing processes, and then the rest of it is for cotton changes, discussing work, toilet stops. And so we are absorbing that we are only ever going to be 75% productive. The other thing is that the factory costs, overheads, salaries, wages are all recouped only off the active machines. And so that is your plain sewing machine, your safety stitcher, and where we are using an overlocker, a 4-thread overlocker to join all the seams like in a t-shirt, we can then also add the overlocker in as an active machine. But the active machines cover everyone else's wages. They cover your cutting room, your person who sweeps and makes tea and cleans the toilets, your driver. All of those costs are amortized and carried by the active machinists only. So any patent machine does not count. So you may be a factory of 300 people and 250 of them are sitting on machines. But of that 250, only 100 of them are actually active machines. The rest are buttonholers, seam covers, bar tack machines, all of that. So let's do the exercise. A factory, you say, employs 150 workers. 75 of those workers are active. And the total running of that factory per day is 5,500 Rand. So we've amortized all of those absorption costs. So 5,500 Rand a day divided by 75 active machinists will give you your cost per active machine. So at the moment it's 73 Rand with a reoccurring 33 cents. So I've rounded it up to 74 Rand per day per active machine per an 8-hour working day. And so we divide the 74 Rand by 8 hours and we get 9 Rand 16 per hour. And so that 9 Rand 16 per hour is then divided by 60 minutes. And so we've got 15 cents per minute. So therefore, a 30-minute sewing operation will be a 4 Rand 58 cost. Okay. Just to cover the cost.
Yes.
We will then do a costing with the sewing minute operation into that.
Okay. That's a very useful way of breaking it down. Thank you so much.
Okay. And that is basically the end of this slide. And so is there anything that we should explore together to interrogate for further understanding?
So for people who are watching who are maybe English is not a first language, what do you mean by amortize?
So I'm going to take my rent, my light and water, and my electricity and divide it out and absorb a little bit of that, which is fair for what I'm using only in the total cost of the household electricity. Okay. And so I will absorb those costs fairly to what I've used every day to run my factory.
Okay, so you're basically taking that number and spreading it out over everything.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, awesome, awesome. And I see in your sum here that you've said 74 Rand a day divided by an 8-hour working day, but you've also mentioned earlier on that you can only expect 75% productivity.
Yeah.
So should that 8-hour working day be reduced possibly?
No, because you will always have to run absorbing some unproductive time. So
Okay.
that is fair. It is absolutely fair. But we do a lot of time study costs in a factory. And so when you look up at a well sorted factory, or even when you're setting up your own sewing process at home, is have everything that you want close by and everything in order. So, you know, if you know that you're doing like a very labor intensive job, like adding the labels onto the back neck, is have all of the sizes in the right size order. So you know that you're working on bundle and this is all a size 36, then you can just do preps on those labels and not move too much. So often in a factory, we would have somebody called a runner, and that would be a young, inexperienced person who's learning the ropes, who would then just go and fetch cotton for a machinist. So the machinist doesn't have to get up and walk all the way to the back storeroom to get the cotton.
Okay. Okay, that's
So
very useful.
we minimize the impossibility of a human being is not going to be 100% productive for all 8 hours.
Okay.
By doing cost studies and time studies and reducing the amount of movement that a machinist has to do in order to be active and producing well. So some factories even have pulley systems where they are pulling the bundles along, and you never actually fully undo the bundle. The bundle stays on a hanger, and you just sew and then throw the pulley system forward to the next machinist.
Okay.
I interrupted you.
So would you recommend that somebody who's doing home sewing and that kind of thing, when they're working on their sample, as they're putting it together, they actually sit with a timer and time how long it takes them to do every single process?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And yes, it's a bit of a kerfuffle. But yeah, I mean, I know by clustering work as a home sewer is I will do all my pattern making on the first day, all of my cutting on the second day, and knowing that on the third day when I do my sewing is the first time I actually start paying because I'm productive.
Mm. Mm.
So then, you know, cluster all of the bundled work into color ranges. So you are just sewing all of the black prep, then you can change threads and you minimize the amount of time that you're doing for operations that could have just been clustered together to make yourself effective.
Mm. I actually think that doing a costing exercise to break down how much time is worth, and then sitting and actually timing how long it takes to do different things, creates just that added awareness and that like tension in the space that when you're doing it, you're going, okay, this is costing me this much. Is it worth doing?
Very much.
And I think this exercise is very, very valuable to do just to raise that level of awareness.
Yeah, and at this point we haven't even spoken about what are you paying yourself and what is your hourly rate worth. And often because so much of this is our passion and our joy, we go, yeah, but we're having fun.
Yes.
Well, and I see that as a coach working with hard drive people is that they feel they're being paid well enough, and so they do a 14-hour day. But when you actually look at your monthly salary divided by an 8-hour, 14-hour, 12-hour, 16-hour day, when you actually then look at what your hourly rate is, you realize they are not paying you well enough. Nobody will pay you what you're worth. It is about valuing your time. And so I can give a very northern suburbs example. where a friend of a friend knows that I sometimes do matric dance dresses for girls that I really love. It's not an income generator for me. And I've had my own daughter and my nieces who I've always done dance dresses for. Now that I'm more of a consultant than a dressmaker anymore. And so a friend of a friend asked me to quote for a matric dance dress. Now, there's no way getting around that a dress, whether it's a matric dance dress or a wedding dress, those are kind of one-off will always take you about 40 hours from start to finish, including 6 fittings. And so there's no shorter way that I could do it other than 40 hours worth of time. And so I gave them a quote, and I know what my minimum tiering is. I will not take a dress on for less than 3,000 Rand. And I'd given her a very, very much reduced cost. And she said, oh no, that's way too expensive. When she then proceeded to talk about how they were going to be drinking Veuve Clicquot at the pre-party. Mm. Now, the champagne will have cost more than what I was charging, but they valued the champagne over the dress.
Yes.
And so when I said, look, I'm not prepared to do it for less than 3,000 Rand, and I've given you a very special price at that, I realized she's not my market.
Yes.
It's not personal.
Yes.
They value Veuve Clicquot more than a dress. Okay,
yes.
It's good stuff. That's just interesting.
Yes, yes.
But do you have, if you are going to do job costing and not process costing, if you're going to do job costing, know that you are going to be more expensive than the average. And are you worth it? And not from your own self-deprecation, but actually, if you have to stand to accountability for what you're modeling for your children, devaluing yourself sets up a very, very difficult model for your children to follow and go, look, my mom, dad, aunt, auntie, granny, whoever, doesn't value themselves as somebody in the clothing industry. And so I don't have to really respect them either, because they don't respect themselves.
That's such a great reflection. I think it will be a lot easier for a lot of people to say, what frame am I modeling for my children?
Yes.
Than to necessarily, yes. I think that's such a great example. Thank you, Colleen. Now, I see we are coming near the end of our time. Thank you so much for those pearls of wisdom. That was beautiful.
Welcome, absolutely welcome.
I so appreciate it. And just give your email address again so that anybody watching who wants to get in touch with you for your masterclasses can.
Sure, it's Colleen, Colleen, at patternworks, patternworks.co.za.
Awesome. So for everybody watching, Colleen does do masterclasses. So if you would like personal attention and to really get into, I know that today she's just skimmed the surface of this information. If you really want to get into some heavy duty stuff with her, she really is like the expert in the field. If there's anybody in the country you want to work with, it's Colleen. So please get in touch with her and sign up for her masterclasses. They really are worthwhile.
Perfect. Thank you, Mel. Thank you for that.
Thanks for your time.
And that's all then.
Yeah.
Pleasure.